Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The Rocking Chair in Grandmother's Attic. When I was 11, my parents sent me to live with my grandmother for a summer while they traveled for work. Her house was an old, creaking thing that seemed to lean under the weight of its own history. Every stair groaned, every door sighed, and the wind had a way of sneaking in through the gaps and whispering along the hallways. I didn't mind, though. Grandmother's home always felt like a place caught between the present and a memory. What unsettled me, however, was the attic. From the very first day, I noticed how often Grandmother locked the door that led upstairs. The brass key never left the chain around her neck. And when I asked about it, she would wave me off with a dismissive flick of her hand and say, "Nothing up there you need to see." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried finality, the kind that left no room for more questions. Still, I was curious. And children are built from curiosity. The first time I heard it, I was brushing my teeth late one night. Above the hum of the old house, a sound floated down through the ceiling. A creak, then another, slow, steady, rhythmic, rocking. I froze, toothbrush still hanging from my mouth. It was unmistakable, the sound of a chair moving back and forth, the deliberate weight of someone sitting in it. I wanted to believe it was the house settling, but the sound repeated itself with too much consistency. The next morning, I mentioned it casually over breakfast. Grandmother's hand stopped halfway to her mouth, spoon trembling just slightly, before she set it down. She didn't look at me when she said, "Attics are noisy places. Best to ignore them." Then she changed the subject and asked if I wanted more toast. Her evasion only stoked the fire of my curiosity. By the second week, the sounds had grown louder. At night, I could swear I heard the chair's wooden feet scraping softly against the floorboards. Sometimes, I even caught what I thought was the faint sigh of someone exhaling, long and tired. I began lying awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining someone sitting directly above me, rocking slowly, waiting. On a rainy afternoon, when Grandmother fell asleep in her armchair, I found myself standing before the attic door. The keyhole was small, and I crouched down, pressing my eye against it. The room beyond was cloaked in dust and shadow, but I could make out shapes, boxes, a wardrobe, the slope of the roof. And there, near the far window, stood a rocking chair. Its back faced the door, but what chilled me wasn't the chair itself. It was that it was turned slightly, as though angled just enough to watch the door. When I leaned back, my pulse hammering, I realized something that made my stomach knot. The chair hadn't been facing that way the last time I looked. That night, the rocking started again. I pressed my pillow over my head, but the sound seeped through the walls like it wanted me to hear it. Sleep finally took me, but my dreams were worse. They showed me the attic door swinging open, the chair dragging itself down step by step, closer and closer to my room. By the third week, I couldn't stand it anymore. One stormy night, while thunder rattled the windows and lightning lit the sky, I made up my mind. I would see for myself. Grandmother had fallen asleep in her usual chair, her knitting fallen from her lap. The key glinted against her chest. My hands trembled as I eased the chain over her head, praying she wouldn't stir. She didn't. Holding the key, I crept to the attic door. The lock gave way with a reluctant click, and I pulled the door open. The air that greeted me was stale and heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Each step up the narrow staircase groaned, the wood threatening to betray me with every move. I reached the top and stopped. The attic stretched out before me in gray darkness. The only light came from a small window where rain streaked down the glass. And there it was, the rocking chair, empty, still, facing the window now. For a moment, relief washed through me. It was just a chair, just wood and fabric. But then, as I stepped closer, the floorboards beneath my feet gave a loud crack, and the chair moved. Slowly, it turned on its own. Inch by inch, the back swiveled until it no longer faced the window, but me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and though no one sat in it, the chair began to rock. Back, forth, back, forth. The motion was deliberate, like an invitation or a warning. A sudden chill wrapped around me, cold enough to sting my skin. The attic seemed to close in, the shadows deepening. And then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. "Sit." I stumbled backward, my legs threatening to give out, and in my panic, I knocked over a box. The crash echoed through the attic, but I didn't care. I bolted down the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me, key still clutched in my hand. My heart wouldn't slow, not even when I crawled under my blanket, trembling. The next morning, Grandmother said nothing about the key I had forgotten to return. She only looked at me with eyes that seemed too knowing, too heavy, and quietly asked, "You went up there, didn't you?" I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't speak. She sighed, more sad than angry, and finally said, "That chair belonged to your grandfather. He never really left it behind." For the rest of that summer, I avoided the attic door. I tried not to listen when the rocking resumed each night. But once, just once, I woke to the sound not above me, but at my bedroom door. The scrape of wood against wood, a patient creak, back, forth, back, forth. When I finally dared to look, the door was closed. But I knew with an awful certainty that the chair had moved again, and it was waiting. Story 2. The office chair that rolled on its own mark had always prided himself on being the last one to leave the office. He liked the silence after everyone else had gone, the way the hum of computers softened, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, and the way the city outside the windows seemed to settle into a slower rhythm. For him, staying late meant focus. No distractions, no phone calls, no coworkers wandering by his desk. That Tuesday night, however, the office didn't feel silent. It felt empty, hollow. Every sound seemed exaggerated, the clicking of his keyboard, the shuffle of papers, even his breathing. He tried to dismiss it as nothing more than fatigue. He had been working overtime for weeks, his eyes strained from staring at spreadsheets, his mind dulled by endless numbers. Still, there was something about the way the office felt that unsettled him. The air seemed too cold, like the air conditioning was working harder than usual. Shadows cast by the overhead lights seemed thicker, slower to retreat when he moved. He shook it off. Just exhaustion. That's what he told himself. It wasn't until nearly midnight that he noticed the chair. At first, it was subtle. The chair at the far end of the office, tucked near the copy machine, wasn't where he remembered it. It had been pushed neatly under the desk earlier in the evening, but now it sat at a slight angle, as though someone had just stood up from it. Mark frowned, leaned back in his own chair, and stared at it for a while. Maybe a janitor had been by, he thought. He returned to his work, trying to ignore the small knot of unease in his stomach. But 20 minutes later, when he stretched and looked up again, the chair had shifted further. It was no longer angled toward the desk. It was turned toward him. Mark froze. His first instinct was to laugh, to chalk it up to a trick of memory. But deep down, he knew. He hadn't imagined where the chair had been before. Slowly, deliberately, it had turned, facing him now, watching. The office was utterly silent, yet Mark's ears buzzed with the sound of his pulse. He stood, walked over to the chair, and pushed it firmly back against the desk. He even gave it a little spin, as though mocking his own paranoia. Satisfied, he returned to his desk and sat down again. Not 5 minutes later, he heard it, a faint scrape, a whisper of wheels against the carpet. Mark's heart stuttered. He turned his head slowly, afraid of what he might see. The chair had rolled out again. Not just a little, this time it sat squarely in the aisle, facing him directly, like an audience member waiting for a performance. Mark's mouth went dry. He wanted to get up, to walk straight out of the office and never return. But something rooted him to his seat. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the paralyzing sense that if he moved too quickly, he might confirm what his mind was already screaming. He wasn't alone. With a shaky laugh, he muttered, "Okay. Very funny." His voice sounded too loud, bouncing strangely off the cubicle walls. He called out a name, any name, hoping it was a coworker playing a prank. No one answered. The silence after his voice faded was unbearable. He reached for his phone, but his hand hesitated above it. Who would he even call? What would he say? That a chair was moving on its own? He could already imagine the ridicule. The scrape came again, this time louder, more deliberate. He snapped his head toward it and felt the blood drain from his face. The chair was rolling forward. Slowly, inch by inch, it glided toward him, its wheels moving as if pushed by invisible hands. Mark stood abruptly, his own chair skidding back behind him. He took a step away, but the office felt distorted now, the rows of cubicles stretching longer than they should. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting erratic shadows. The chair kept coming. Mark backed away until his legs hit his desk. He was trapped between the advancing chair and the window that overlooked the city. He could feel the glass cool against his back, his reflection faintly visible behind him. The chair stopped a few feet away. For a long, unbearable moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, it spun. Not wildly, not playfully, just one slow, deliberate rotation, as though something was sitting in it, turning to face him fully. Mark's breath caught. He could swear he saw an impression on the seat cushion, as though weight pressed down on it. A subtle indentation, the faint suggestion of someone unseen. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice cracked. The chair rolled again, just a few inches closer. That was enough. Mark bolted, grabbing his bag and sprinting down the hallway. His footsteps echoed against the linoleum, his shadow stretching unnaturally long with each flickering light. He didn't stop to look back until he was outside, standing on the street, gasping in the cool night air. From the sidewalk, the office windows looked ordinary, still, empty. But Mark swore he saw it. On the other side of the glass, in the darkened office, the chair sitting in the aisle turned toward the window, turned toward him. And for just a fraction of a second, he thought he saw movement in the glass. A figure seated there, invisible yet unmistakably present, watching him with patient stillness. He never worked late again. But sometimes, when he walked past the building at night, he avoided looking up, because he knew, deep in his bones, that if he did, he'd see that chair, waiting, watching, still facing him, as though it had never stopped. Story 3. The antique dining set that watched at night. When I inherited my great-aunt Sylvia's house, I thought I was gaining a relic of family history. A place frozen in time, where lace curtains still fluttered in the drafty windows and the walls smelled faintly of cedar and dust. But nothing in that creaking, sprawling Victorian seemed to hold my attention quite like the dining room. It wasn't the ornate chandelier, nor the faded wallpaper with its repeating floral pattern. It was the massive, antique dining set that sat squarely in the center of the room. The table was long, carved from dark oak, polished smooth despite decades of disuse. 8 high-backed chairs surrounded it, each one with clawed feet and a curved spine that gave the illusion of skeletal figures frozen in mid-motion. Their upholstery had been replaced at some point, but their wood was original, blackened with age and care. At first, I thought of the set as an heirloom, an elegant piece of the past that tied me to Sylvia's eccentric life. She had been the type of woman to hold seances, to believe in spirits whispering through the veil. My parents always dismissed her as peculiar, but standing in that dining room, I wondered if she had been onto something deeper. The air was heavy in there, heavier than in the rest of the house, as though the very walls were leaning in, watching, waiting. It began subtly. On my first night, I walked through the dining room to check the back door and noticed one of the chairs pulled out slightly. I brushed it off as my own oversight. Perhaps I had bumped it while moving through. But the next morning, when I went in to open the curtains, another chair sat askew, turned slightly toward the window. I stared at it for a long time before reaching down to push it back. By the third night, I couldn't deny it anymore. I woke to the sound of something faint, wood dragging over wood. I crept downstairs barefoot, my heart pounding, and found the dining room bathed in moonlight. The chairs had shifted. 2 of them faced the doorway where I stood, angled just enough that they seemed expectant, as though they had known I was coming. The fear didn't arrive all at once. It seeped into me slowly, like water dripping into a cracked foundation. I told myself furniture couldn't move on its own. Maybe the floor was uneven. Maybe the house was settling. But deep down, I remembered the stories Sylvia used to tell at family gatherings, about objects that hold memories, about items that aren't just wood or fabric, but vessels. The real terror came a week later. I had invited my friend Clara over, hoping for company to ease my unease. She laughed at the dining set, running her fingers along the spindly arms of one chair. "They look like they're alive," she joked. We sat in the living room for hours, sipping wine, until Clara excused herself to use the bathroom. She didn't come back right away. When I went looking for her, I found her standing rigid in the dining room doorway, her face pale. "They're turned," she whispered. And they were. All 8 chairs had shifted slightly, their high backs facing the table, their seats outward, like an audience waiting for a performance. The table was empty, yet the arrangement made my stomach churn. Clara refused to sit in them, and when I suggested moving the set out of the house, she insisted we shouldn't touch them at all. "They're old," she said nervously, "and some old things don't want to be disturbed." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. At around 3 a.m., I heard the dragging sound again. Against my better judgment, I went downstairs. The dining room door stood ajar, though I had shut it earlier. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. All 8 chairs now faced the table again, but something had changed. On the tabletop lay a thin layer of dust, except for 8 perfect handprints pressed into the wood, evenly spaced where plates might have been. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. No one had been in the house. No one but me. The following days blurred together. I avoided the dining room, keeping the door firmly closed. But at night, I swore I heard low creaks, the faint squeak of chair legs shifting across hardwood. Once, I woke to the distinct impression of being watched. When I gathered the courage to peek out my bedroom door, I saw it, the faint silhouette of a chair in the hallway, facing my door. I nearly left the house for good, but something held me there. Maybe it was the morbid pull of curiosity, or maybe it was the house itself keeping me bound. I decided to test them. One evening, I moved all the chairs to one side of the room, lining them against the wall. I wanted to see what would happen. At first, nothing. I sat in the living room, staring at the closed dining room door, listening. An hour passed. Then 2. Around midnight, the sound came, the slow, deliberate scrape of wood dragging across the floorboards. My chest tightened. I crept toward the dining room, each step heavier than the last, and opened the door. The chairs were back in their places, all 8 arranged perfectly around the table. But worse than that, they were angled slightly toward me. That was the night I realized the truth. They weren't just moving. They were waiting, watching. I've stopped inviting people over. I've stopped eating in the dining room. I keep the door locked, though I know it doesn't matter. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faintest whisper of laughter, low and creaking, as if wood itself could breathe. I don't know why the dining set is like this. Maybe Sylvia knew. Maybe that's why she left the house to me. Maybe she believed I could handle it. But I can feel it now, when I walk past that room, when I try to sleep, when the silence stretches too long. They're patient, they're old, and they're waiting for me to sit down. Story 4. The theater seat that turned before the lights went out. It was one of those small-town theaters that still carried the scent of velvet curtains, old popcorn, and dust, frozen in time, almost as if it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The Briarwood Playhouse, locals called it. Once glamorous, now only used for small community events, school plays, and any occasional independent film. I wasn't a performer or a movie buff, but I volunteered at the theater, helping clean and set up between shows. The building had its quirks: doors that refused to stay shut, lights that flickered even after rewiring, and cold spots in the aisles that made your skin crawl. But the one thing that stuck out, something everyone whispered about, was seat D12. On the right side of the lower orchestra section, row D, 12th chair in. It didn't look different from the others. Faded red upholstery, a polished wooden armrest, creaking hinges. But staff swore it moved on its own. People claimed they'd seen it swivel slightly, as though someone invisible had turned it, always just before the lights went out at the end of a performance. At first, I laughed it off. A loose hinge, maybe, or the sagging weight of age pulling it at an angle. But the stories grew stranger. An old usher told me he once heard a faint cough from D12 during a show, when no one was sitting there. Another staffer said she saw the seat spin halfway around before the stage lights dimmed, then snap back as if nothing had happened. I thought it was just theater folklore, until I experienced it myself. It was late, after a small theater troupe had finished rehearsals. I stayed behind to sweep, straighten programs, and lock up. The building felt hollow when it was empty. The silence pressed against your ears, broken only by the groans of the old wood settling. I was halfway down the aisle when I noticed it. Seat D12 wasn't facing forward. It was turned slightly to the left, as if whoever had been sitting there wanted a better angle of the stage. I froze, broom clutched in my hand. The memory of the rumors prickled up my spine. Slowly, I approached, half expecting to find a loose bolt or maybe even someone messing with me. But the seat was solid. I nudged it, and it resisted like every other chair. I chalked it up to exhaustion and forced myself to move on. The following week, I was assigned to work sound for a school performance. The children's choir sang, their voices filling the dusty rafters. Parents clapped and cheered, cameras flashed. I sat in the back with the tech board, eyes occasionally drifting toward D12. Just before the final number ended, I saw it shift. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it moved again. Slowly, steadily, as though someone invisible was swiveling around to look at me instead of the stage. My stomach dropped. No one else seemed to notice. The audience was too engrossed in their kids. But I couldn't look away. Then the lights dimmed for the closing bow, and in the instant before the theater went dark, I swear the chair turned fully sideways, facing the aisle. When the lights came up again, it was back in place. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I confided in Clara, the box office manager. She wasn't surprised. Instead, she leaned in, whispering like she was telling me a secret. That seat belonged to Elliot Marrow, she said. He was a critic, used to come to every show, every film, always sat in D12. The story goes, he died of a heart attack in that very seat, just before the lights went down one evening. Nobody noticed until the end of the performance. They thought he was just sitting extra still. Her words made my skin crawl. Over the next month, I found myself obsessively checking the chair. During rehearsals, shows, even while cleaning, my eyes drifted to D12. Sometimes it was facing forward, sometimes slightly turned. And once, only once, I saw it spin just as the stage lights flickered out. The real terror came on my last night working there. A local troupe was performing a murder mystery play. The house was full, every seat occupied, except D12. It had been left empty on purpose, almost out of respect, as if no one dared sit there anymore. I sat near the back, watching. During the final act, when the killer revealed himself, the theater fell into hushed silence. And then, as the stage lights began their slow fade to black, D12 moved. Not just a slight turn, but a full pivot, creaking loudly enough for me, and only me, to hear. It turned straight around, the seat facing the back of the theater. Facing me. In the dimming glow, I saw the outline of a figure sitting in it. Broad shoulders, hands folded in a critic's posture, his head tilted slightly as though he knew I was watching him. And then, darkness. When the lights came back, the seat was empty. Facing forward again. I quit the theater the following week, but sometimes when I pass Briarwood Playhouse, I glance through the glass doors and see the faintest impression. Seat D12, angled just slightly, as though Elliot Marrow is still there. Watching. Waiting for the lights to go out again. Story 5, the nursery chair that refused to stay still. When Allison and Mark bought the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Vermont, they knew it came with its quirks. The realtor had joked about the drafty halls, the creaking floors, and the odd layout of the upstairs rooms. But what sold them on the house was its charm, the tall windows, the wide porch, and most of all, the nursery that overlooked the apple orchard in the back. It seemed the perfect place to raise their first child, who was due in just a few months. The nursery came already furnished with one peculiar piece, a small white rocking chair, delicately carved, with faded floral patterns along the backrest. Allison assumed it had been left behind by the previous owners. Its paint was chipped, its cushions worn, but something about it gave the room a strangely complete feeling. Mark suggested tossing it out, but Allison had insisted on keeping it, saying it felt meant to be there. At first, the chair was harmless, but Allison noticed small, unsettling things almost immediately. Whenever she walked into the nursery, the chair seemed to be at a slightly different angle than before. Facing the crib one day, turned toward the window the next. She assumed it was her memory playing tricks or Mark moving it when he cleaned. But Mark swore he hadn't touched it. One evening, while folding tiny onesies, Allison heard the faintest creak behind her. She froze, the sound prickling across her skin. Slowly, she turned her head, only to see the chair rocking back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm. The window was closed, the air still. She tried to rationalize. Maybe the floorboards had shifted as she moved. Maybe she'd nudged it without realizing. But she couldn't shake the cold unease that had rooted itself deep in her chest. The days grew stranger. Each morning, Allison would find the chair pulled closer to the crib, not just angled toward it, but closer, as if someone or something was inching nearer to where her baby would soon sleep. Once, Allison measured the distance, and the next day it had moved a full foot forward. When she finally confronted Mark with her fears, he dismissed them. "It's an old house," he said. "Drafts, creaks, shifting floors. It's all normal." But even he went pale the night they both heard it. It was just after midnight when the sound came, the creak of wood, slow and deliberate, echoing up the hallway. They sat up in bed, holding their breaths, listening. The nursery door, just down the hall, groaned softly as if it had been nudged. Then came the sound of gentle rocking, rhythmic and patient. Mark grabbed a flashlight, his jaw set, but when he opened the nursery door, the chair was perfectly still, sitting right beside the crib. Neither of them slept that night. In the weeks that followed, Allison became obsessed. She tried moving the chair to different corners of the room, but no matter where she placed it, she always found it returned beside the crib the next morning. She even locked it in the closet, pushing boxes against the door. But the next day, the chair was back in its place, swaying gently as though someone had just left it. Allison began to dream about it. Dreams where a shadowy figure sat in the chair, its head bowed, whispering to the crib. Sometimes the figure rocked slowly. Sometimes it leaned forward as though listening. Once she swore she woke to find the chair moving in the dark, yet when she blinked, it was still again. The night the baby came, the air in the house felt heavy, charged with a tension that neither Allison nor Mark could name. Exhausted after hours of labor, Allison finally drifted off to sleep with her newborn son, tucked safely in the crib. Sometime around 3 a.m, she stirred awake, heart hammering. The sound was back, the unmistakable, deliberate creak of wood. She sat up, clutching her blanket, eyes straining in the dim glow of the nightlight. The chair was rocking, slow, steady, as though an unseen hand pressed against it. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized it wasn't just rocking, it was angled directly toward the crib. "Allison," Mark whispered, already awake, staring at the same sight. She wanted to scream, to grab her baby and run, but her body refused to move. And then, soft as a lullaby, they heard it. A faint hum, melodic, coming from the chair. It was almost soothing, like someone trying to sing the baby to sleep. Their son stirred, let out a tiny coo, and Allison snapped into action. She scooped him up, holding him close, as Mark grabbed the chair and shoved it against the wall. But even pressed there, it rocked on its own. Desperation turned into rage. Mark hauled the chair out of the nursery and down the stairs, dragging it out into the cold night air. He threw it onto the porch, muttering curses under his breath. For a while, the house was silent again. But when Allison woke the next morning, the chair was back in the nursery, exactly where it had always been, pressed against the crib. They couldn't live like that. Within the week, they sold the house, packing everything they owned except for that cursed chair, which they left behind. The new owners took the house without question, though Allison wondered if they'd been warned too. Months later, she stumbled across an old photograph at the town's historical society, tucked inside a dusty album. It was of their farmhouse nursery, decades earlier. In the picture, a young woman sat in the very same rocking chair, cradling a baby in her arms. Her eyes looked hollow, her expression bleak. Written beneath the photograph was a single line, "Anna May with her child, lost in the winter of 1923. Allison felt her stomach drop. She never found out what had happened to Anna May's baby, nor why her chair remained in that nursery, waiting. All she knew was that she had escaped in time, and that someone else's lullaby had almost claimed her child. Chairs are objects we take for granted, meant only for sitting, meant to remain still. But when they move on their own, when they turn to face you in the silence of night, they stop being furniture and become something else, something watching. If you've ever felt the unsettling scrape of wood on floorboards when no one was there, or noticed a chair out of place that you swore you left untouched, you know the truth. Not everything that shares your home is inanimate. Sometimes, the things you trust most to stay still are the very things that want to remind you, you are never alone.